Hello guys. I thought today I would do something a little different and do a how-to on how I make signs out of vinyl stencils. I generally start in Illustrator, especially if it's typographic, because I have more control over my letter spacing and kerning and things. And then I will either save it to PNG and take it into Silhouette or print it depending on what I'm doing. Here I'm doing half and half. So I'm taking the word harder and using that as a PNG in Silhouette so that I can print it, or so that I can have my machine cut it out of the vinyl. The word hustle I am doing in string art, so that I print it out so that I can use that printout as sort of a map. Right now I am tracing the word harder with the Silhouette software so that all I have is the outline of that second word. And I'm making two in case I decide to make two of the same sign. Saving it, sending it to the machine, all of that stuff. This isn't so much a how to use the Silhouette software or the cutting machine. This is once you have that stencil cut out, this is how you would make the sign. I am not really an expert on the Silhouette software. I am self-taught and I have figured out how to use it for the things that I do. I can't even guarantee that I'm doing it the best way, but if you guys would like me to do various little tutorials on the Silhouette software, comment below and let me know. Otherwise, I know there are tons of videos already out there for how to do certain things. The machine is cutting the vinyl. This blue vinyl, I got it from Vinyl Expressions, and it is specifically for stencils. I'm going to be honest and say it's not my favorite, and I don't know that I will get it again, but that is where I got it. Now I'm doing what is called weeding the vinyl. You're going to pull out all of the pieces that represent where you would want the paint. So you're going to leave the centers of the letters and things like that in this case. Excuse my voice. I'm not sick. I just did a little too much screaming at a Timbers game. So you keep pulling off all the little pieces of letter that are where you want the paint to be. The next thing I'm doing is rolling out a section of transfer paper. This is what you're going to stick your vinyl on, because if you were to just pull the backing off of your vinyl and try to lay that vinyl down by itself, you're going to have this floppy thing you can't control, and you need a little bit of stability to be able to get it centered on your board or whatever you're painting onto. I personally do wooden signs, so this technique I've only really done on wood, so that's what I'm going to recommend. Now I'm just taking like a credit card, gift card. This is an old season ticket to my Timbers games. But they sell squeegees for this. You're basically just trying to really stick that transfer paper down to your vinyl so that when you pull the backing off of your vinyl, it is all stuck to the transfer paper, and like the centers of your letters aren't accidentally coming off onto the backing. I try to go in all sorts of different directions and make sure that it's really stuck down. Again, not in love with this vinyl, and I find that I have to do a lot of this extra. I mean, I would do it on other vinyl as well, but I find I have to do it a lot on this vinyl. So now I've measured it out and I've gotten it where I wanted to. centered on the board, all of those good things. And I'm pulling off just a little section of the backing. And then that's going to become sort of tape. And I'm going to press it down so that it'll hold it in place. And I no longer have to hold it with both hands to make sure it doesn't move. And then I bend it back and I start to pull off the rest of it very slowly, because again, I don't want the centers of my letters to come off onto that backing. And every now and then you'll see that I have to sort of pause for a second and maybe use my fingernail or something and make sure the center of a letter isn't coming off. And then I just use my hand as sort of a squeegee and press down what I've pulled the backing off of already, and just slowly make my way through tearing pieces off so that it's easier to manage. If you're finding that it's just not releasing from the backing very easily, you may want to just lay it back down and use your card or squeegee or whatever to try and fix that and make the transfer paper stick a little bit better. So now I've got it onto my board, which I've already sanded and stained and all that good stuff. And now I'm doing the same thing I did before, only I'm trying to ensure that all of the little bits and pieces are sticking to the board, whereas before I was trying to make sure it all stuck to the transfer paper. I'm using my finger just to try and make sure all of the little edges are stuck down. And now I pull that transfer paper off of the vinyl. And you have to pull fairly hard with this particular brand. And you want to make sure that you're not stretching the vinyl, because it will sometimes lift up from the board. And that's fine as long as you're not stretching it and you just push it back down as it's coming off. That's why I go nice and slow. And I find that it works better if I pull that transfer paper at a pretty sharp angle. You can see I'm bent back almost entirely and slowly pulling that back. And anytime I catch something lifting or not coming off of the transfer paper like I just did there, I will just take my finger and pick it off the transfer paper and make sure that it sticks down to the board exactly where it's supposed to be. It can be quite tricky. I find that getting it started is the hardest part, and then once you get going, it goes a little bit more smoothly. The reason that I do stencils more often than freehand is because it just really helps me ensure that everything's perfect, and I struggle with a little bit of perfectionism, and this is one way that I can sort of mass produce, if you call making 3 or 4 of the same sign mass production, and make sure that they all look the same. Whereas if I do freehand stuff, there's going to be a lot of variation. I really like having these crisp, perfect lines on my letters specifically when I'm doing typographic signs, and I do a lot of typographic signs. As a graphic designer, I have a special place in my heart for them. So you saw me put a little bit of painter's tape on the edges. I really only do that where my letters are close to the edge, just so that I can make sure I don't hit the board. Now I'm taking a very, very fine layer of Mod Podge, you know, the gluey stuff that you do decoupage with. I find that this really helps get that crisp line once I paint it. So you're just going to do one very, very thin coat of Mod Podge. I try to make sure that I go in basically all directions to make sure that I'm getting right up at the edge of that stencil. So I'll go up and down a few times and then hit side to side to make sure that I have nice, smooth brush strokes, sponge brush strokes. I use the same sponge brush over and over. I just wash it out between signs and I can just keep using it. This is the type of paint that I use for my signs. It's Amy Howard's One Step paint. You can get it in a couple different sizes, and there are several colors. I use this simple contractor's paintbrush. And here I'm using the linen color. I like it a little bit more than just the stark white. It makes it look a little more vintage rustic on these dark wood signs especially. The wood stain that I used is called Kona. It's an oil-based paint. It'll take a little longer to dry. So I usually try to stain them a day ahead of when I'm going to make them. And then I do 2 coats, thin coats of the paint, letting it dry to the touch in between. If I can touch it and it's not really very tacky, then I'll do my second coat. If you touch the vinyl first and it's quite wet, that doesn't necessarily mean that the paint on the wood is still wet. You can see I had a fingerprint there where I had touched the vinyl and it was still a little tacky. I waited just a couple more minutes and the wood itself where I painted wasn't tacky. It dries a bit faster on the wood. You need to be careful with this paint. If it's been exposed to the air too long, you can get little chunks of dried up paint. You can see me trying to pick one out of the paint right there. Not a big deal. Get it out, brush it off to the side on the vinyl like I did, and it shouldn't be a problem. You also want to be careful about the temperature of the space you're working in. If it's too cold or too warm, the paint is going to not work as effectively, meaning it might get sticky really early. I tried to refinish an end table over the summer and it was too hot in the shop I work in, and the paint would just get really tacky quickly. It also, especially if it's too cold, it can be difficult to manage the drying time. So now that it is all dry, I am going back and pulling the vinyl off. It leaves really lovely crisp letters like that. You're going to see flicks of paint popping off, and that's just coming off the vinyl because it doesn't stick very well to that, but it does stick beautifully to the signs. Then I'm going to take the back edge of my X-Acto knife, just like I did when I weeded the vinyl, but now I'm pulling out those other bits that I would have left when I weeded the vinyl so that you can see the center parts of the letters. And you're going to be very careful so that you don't gouge the wood. That's why I use the back of the blade and not the sharp side. And very carefully just pull those little bits out. And then brush off all those little chunks of paint and you'll have your beautiful typographic signs. These are the other signs that I made that day. That's the half and half that you just saw me do. Once they're done, I use some beeswax finish, and you can buy cloths like this that are lint free. I just got them at the lumberyard hardware store up the street. You take just a little bit of wax. I start with the edges, but I've already done the edges. And then I do the front. I don't really do the back because nobody's gonna see it. And I don't want the wax. I don't want anybody to have any issues with the wax on their walls and things like that. So I choose to usually not put wax on the back. I do it on the sides and the front. Very thin layer. Dutch is supervising back there in his bed. Once I have it all covered with this cloth, I will leave it and let it dry. It doesn't take too long. Again, if you touch it and it's not tacky, then it's plenty dry. I think I left it for a couple hours or something. So now I'm taking the other half of that cloth, a clean cloth, and I'm wiping it down again now that it's dry. And the last thing I do, as long as I'm not also doing string art to the sign, is I'm hanging the hardware on it so that whoever buys it or myself can hang it. measured it all out, found center, all of those good things. Sorry about the jiggling of the camera. The camera was on the same table I was working on, so when I hammered it, it was an earthquake. This is the little tin of hangers I got. I got it at Michael's. I've made quite a few signs with just one tin of these. So this is a collection of the signs that I've made. I hope this helps you make some really beautiful signs. If you have any questions, go ahead and comment below. Please click like, subscribe, and all of those good things.